I'm going to move through what I've read recently rather quickly because there's quite a lot. It's been a couple weeks since I filmed. I've been just kind of in a read zone and I didn't really feel like filming. But that means that I've made my way through a large number of books and I can't possibly talk about them all. In fact, a number of them I've actually purged from my collection already and passed on to a charity bin, so those are long gone, so I won't be talking about those. And those were the bad ones anyway. I've actually got one more headed to that charity bin. I don't even know how I ended up buying this. I don't know why I bought this, but it was horrible. So horrible. And I don't know why I finished. In fact, I kind of skimmed the middle just to see how it ended. Leopard's Fury by Christine Freehan. And this is a paranormal romance. Never trying one of that genre again. Really bad. But what I did while I was not filming was a Stephen King binge. An absolute binge. And it all began about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, with Stephen King's collection of short stories, Night Shift, which came out in the 1970s. It was 79, I believe. I'm just going to double check here. But I picked this up kind of on a whim. 76, actually. It was originally published in 76. This is a 2011 printing here, but this is his very first collection of short stories ever released. Some of them have been previously published in other publications individually, but this is one of the best collection of short stories that I've ever read. One of the best collection of horror short stories, definitely. These ones are definitely part of his earlier body of writing, and I really do love his earlier writing more so than his more recent writing. I kind of see King in three eras. You have the 1970s into the 80s, and then his writing kind of changes in the late 80s into the 90s, and then in about mid-2000s we get kind of a different flavor in his writing as well. I think the early King writing is kind of my favorite. Up until about the mid-80s is really the stuff from him that I like the most. This short story collection is creepy in a very kind of classic and overt way. We get you know, the kind of monsters and demons and vampires and machines that come to life because they're possessed, and giant rats that devour people, that kind of horror. Whereas some of his later writings they're more psychological, they're more about human beings and the terror that they can bring. Some of my favorite ones in this collection, though, Jerusalem's Lot, which is tied into his novel Salem's Lot, which I really love. Graveyard Shift, that is the one where this group of guys are tasked with cleaning out the basement, and they discover these giant, horrendous, kind of man-eating rats down there. The Mangler, that one probably chilled me the most out of all the stories in this collection because it's dealing with kind of a machine that malfunctions and kills people. It's this machine in a laundry, this pressing and folding machine for the sheets, and the short story opens with the death of a woman who got pulled into this machine, and they're trying to figure out how the safety bar malfunctioned. And after an investigation, it's revealed that the safety bar was working just fine. It didn't malfunction at all. And the man who's investigating comes to believe, after a few more accidents, that this machine is possessed by a demon. And of course the end is to fight quite fantastical and quite unbelievable. But just the first half of the story, when you're not really sure what's wrong with this machine, anyone who's worked near any kind of machinery, that's really chilling to think of an industrial accident like that. What were some other ones I liked? I Know What You Need, Children of the Corn was quite interesting. The Man Who Loved Flowers, The Woman in the Room, that one's good as well. But if you're looking for an easy way to dive into King for the first time, into Stephen King, maybe check out his collection of short stories, Night Shift. Something I'm getting light shining in my eyes from the window. But after that, I picked up one that had been on my shelf for quite a while, actually. I think I'm going to have to pause to close that blind. Okay, that's much better. But after that collection of short stories, that's what triggered my binge. I picked up one I'd had on my shelf since late fall, early winter, and that is Needful Things, which was published in 1992. So this is the 90s era King, and this is probably my favorite that I've read from that era in the 90s so far. It's a very, very slow burn, and I'll probably do a complete review of this one sometime soon. But the premise is that this mysterious man shows up in a small town and opens this shop called Needful Things, and of course all the women start to gossip, all the locals start to come in, and the shopkeeper doesn't sell normal things. He sells things that people need. He sells people their feelings, objects they can't live without, and it may or may not be what they believe it to be, but in selling them these things, he makes a deal in exchange for a prank played on someone else in the town, which leads to disastrous consequences, and they are essentially selling their soul for the desired object, for a baseball card, for a pretty piece of glass, for a cure to a disease, and so on and so forth. And nearly everyone in the town is drawn in to this shop and end up purchasing something, and little by little they start to destroy themselves until one day, right on plan, the entire town erupts in disaster. And I won't say much more than that, because the disaster is truly something to behold, quite thrilling to read. Then I dove into Dr. Sleep. I read Dr. Sleep next, I think. This is the sequel to The Shining. I really like The Shining. Not as much as Salem's Lot or It, but The Shining is right up there with some of my favorite King novels. Dr. Sleep, not nearly as good, but it was interesting to get the sequel to this. I debated about whether I was going to keep this novel or not. I pulled it out of my get rid of bag at the last moment and did end up keeping it. It's many years. The little boy from The Shining is all grown up. Dan is all grown up, and he begins to telepathically communicate through his shining ability with a little girl somewhere, and when she's in trouble, he goes running, and that is the premise of this novel. Then I read Misery, which, I mean, it was alright. Maybe if I had been in a different frame of mind, I would have liked it better. I liked the premise, but I felt like it could have been executed better. This book was really, really hyped up, so I was expecting a lot from it, and I didn't really get that. It's about a best-selling novelist who is in a life-threatening accident out in the middle of nowhere in Maine, and he is rescued by his biggest fan, who operates on his legs, knocks him out with painkillers, and ties him up. And after reading the ending of his most recent novel, is very, very upset over the fate of her favorite character. And she has a murderous streak in her and would like her favorite author to write a novel just for her. Interesting to read, not quite as horrifying as I expected, but still quite horrifying because she's willing to chop him up to get the novel that she wants. But I did expect better things from it. Maybe I'll review that one as well. And I read 2 novels by Joe Hill, The Heart-Shaped Box. I've already filmed a review of this one that'll probably go up before this Friday Reads video. And liking that so much, I read his novel Horns, which is about a man who wakes up from a drunken night to discover he's grown horns like the devil, and people are telling him their deepest, darkest thoughts as he approaches them. And he's quite perturbed by that, and no one seems to notice the horns. There's some intrigue about his deceased girlfriend who died exactly a year ago, and everyone believes that he is the one who murdered her, although he was never charged, because the warehouse storing the evidence mysteriously burnt down. And so our main character, Ignatius, is kind of left wondering what the hell is going on, why this has happened to him, and it doesn't take him too long to figure out that there are some perks to waking up as the devil. And he sets out for a little bit of revenge. It wasn't as good as I had hoped it would be. It was difficult sometimes to tell exactly how he was going about his revenge, what he was up to. He seemed to be wandering, meandering a bit. I would have liked the character to have kind of a firmer discipline, a firmer plan, a firmer will. It was almost like he was stumbling into revenge as opposed to seeking it out. As well, there was a lot of flashbacks in this novel. A lot of going back to his teenage years, to him meeting his dead girlfriend Marin in church. And I found some of that childhood, teenage year stuff a little bit boring, and I wanted Hill to get back to the present day story, get back to him, his character Ignatius as the devil, as the one seeking this revenge. But we spent a third to half of the novel in that yesteryear land. And there was also some weird stuff about him and Marin a couple years back finding kind of a magical treehouse. And it's not clear whether that's drug-fueled hallucination, kind of a magical realm that existed just for them, something that's happened because he's been knocked on the head. It's hard to say exactly what that treehouse is, but it does play a role in the final showdown between him and the man who really killed Marin, his girlfriend. Like the Heart-Shaped Box, as I discuss in the review of that novel, there's a lot of exploration into the character here, though. We really learn to care for the character. Everyone, even his own parents, are against him. One of the fatal perks of waking up as the devil is that everyone is completely honest with their darkest thoughts. And so he hears what his father really thinks about him. His father really believes that he murdered his girlfriend. He discovers the same thing from his mother, from his grandmother, from everyone in his life. He believed that at least some people he loved really believed that he didn't do it. And then when he wakes up as the devil, those illusions are shattered and he essentially has nothing to lose. Then I went back to some more Stephen King. Stephen King's Everything's Eventual, 14 Dark Tales, and these are from 2002. I didn't like these nearly as much as Night Shift, partly because to call them Dark Tales isn't entirely accurate. I mean, some of them are kind of dark, but some of them are not entirely horror. They're not the Dark Tales I was expecting. There were some that I really did like, many that I was kind of blasé about, and some that I didn't really like at all. I'll probably do a separate video for this as well. This is getting very, very long. One more book. This is one I read yesterday, and it is Delores Claiborne. It is set within the same realm as his other novel, Gerald's Game, and Gerald's Game was a pretty decent but disturbing novel just because it was set in the realm of reality. There wasn't really anything supernatural going on in Gerald's Game. It was about a woman against nature and struggling with a physical predicament she's in, as well as emotional trauma from her past. And King, needlessly I would say, decided to link this to Gerald's Game by making a reference, kind of a psychic reference, between two characters who both experienced this solar eclipse that happened a few years previous. So in Gerald's Game, the main character recalls a traumatic event that happened during this eclipse when she was a little girl. In this novel, the main character, Delores, recalls doing something horrible to her husband that she had planned, something premeditated, during the eclipse. And in this novel, the eclipse was more of an opportune moment as opposed to a traumatic event, and I'm not really sure why King felt he had to link them. It was almost a self-indulgent whim there. But this is a character-driven novel. Delores is hauled in, accused of the murder of her longtime employer. She's worked for her for about 40 years, started as a housekeeper and maid, and eventually turned into a live-in caregiver in this wealthy woman's home. She's accused of this woman's murder because she has tumbled down the stairs, broken things, and died. Even though it was generally accepted that she hasn't been able to walk on her own or get out of a wheelchair on her own for quite a while. So hauled into the police station, Delores confesses to what she did to her husband decades before while proclaiming her innocence in the murder of her employer, and telling kind of the relationship, her story of her relationship with her employer, with this woman. And in some ways the relationship reminds me a little bit of the relationship between Mellie and Scarlett in Gone with the Wind. They looked like enemies, but they actually cared quite a bit for each other, and they were really all that the other one had. So it's a very interesting relationship, a toxic relationship between the two women. An interesting novel to read. So what am I reading this weekend? Today I started a book that I've had on my shelf for a couple of months, and it is Fanny Hill, or Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure. And this is in a Modern Library Classics edition. It was published in the 1700s. I'm not sure of the exact date here. I could look it up, of course, but the author, John Cleland, died in 1789, so that gives you some idea of when it was published. And it is literally a pornographic novel. And I believe it was the first... oh, here we go, right on the back. I'm so dumb. This uncensored version is set from the 1749 edition. It includes commentary by Charles Rumbar, the lawyer who defended the novel in the 1966 U.S. Supreme Court case. I believe it was the the first one of the first pornographic novels published in the English language. And I wasn't entirely sure of what I was getting into, so it was interesting that I started reading this on the bus. It's quite good so far. It's interesting, although it's a little bit absurd, but novels of that era often were. The protagonist, the heroine, is the dimmest, dumbest woman you could ever meet. She doesn't seem to realize that she's being sold into prostitution. She's incredibly naive, and I think that's what the book was sold based on, this naive woman falling into the world of pleasure. So I'm going to enjoy reading the rest of this. I'm not sure whether it's something I'll keep and read again. We'll see how I like it when it comes to the end. Very nice cover here, this painting. The cover design is Vito D'Acona, Sotheby's, London. I'm sure it must be some sort of well-known painting that I'm not familiar with. So that's what I'm up to this weekend. That's what I've read recently. A couple more reviews probably coming this weekend. I'm really in a filming mood. I was at work today and I really wanted to get out of there and film some videos and do some reading and just got on with my weekend. It was that kind of Friday.